The blood wouldn't stop. Evelyn pressed the torn fabric of her nightgown against her body, her bare feet silent against the cold wooden planks of the porch. Behind her, the sprawling ranch house loomed like a tombstone against the star-scattered sky, its windows dark except for the single candle flickering in the room where they'd kept her locked away for 3 months, where they'd told her that her daughter, her precious, perfect daughter, was cursed. Bring nothing but sorrow, her mother-in-law had hissed through the keyhole just hours before. Mark my words, that child will be the death of us all. The baby stirred against Evelyn's chest, her tiny fists wrapped in the moth-eaten shawl that had been her grandmother's. Even in the moonlight, Evelyn could see the delicate features that had so enraged her husband's family. The unusual violet eyes, the birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on her left temple. Signs of the devil, they'd called it. Evidence of a woman who'd brought shame upon the Blackwood name. Evelyn's legs trembled as she stepped into the dust of the yard, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through her wounded body. The September wind cut through her thin clothing like a blade, but she welcomed it. Anything was better than the suffocating darkness of that room, the endless prayers muttered outside her door, the way they'd snatched her daughter away for hours at a time, returning her only when her cries became too loud to ignore. She had no plan, no destination, no hope beyond the simple animal need to protect her child. The nearest town was 15 miles through desert and scrubland, a journey that would kill them both in her condition, but she walked anyway, because staying meant watching them break her daughter's spirit the way they'd broken hers. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a sea of silver sage and shadow under the watching stars. Chapter 2, The House of Forgotten Things. Miles blurred together like fever dreams. Evelyn's vision swam with exhaustion and blood loss, her feet raw and bleeding from the rocky ground. The baby had stopped crying hours ago, lying too still against her chest, and that silence terrified her more than any sound. When the cabin appeared through the pre-dawn mist, she thought it was a mirage. Low and weathered, it sat in a grove of ancient cottonwoods like something from a half-remembered dream. No smoke rose from its chimney, no light showed in its windows, but something about it called to her, perhaps the garden that sprawled wild and beautiful around its foundations, or the way the morning light seemed to gather gently in its eaves. She collapsed against the front door, her knuckles barely managing 3 weak knocks before darkness claimed her. When consciousness returned, she found herself in a bed that smelled of lavender and sage, her daughter sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her. Sunlight streamed through windows hung with simple cotton curtains, and she could hear the sound of someone moving quietly in another room. "You're awake." The voice was deep, careful, like a man who'd grown used to speaking only to himself. "I was beginning to worry." Evelyn turned her head and saw him in the doorway, tall and lean, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered but kind, marked by the sort of deep lines that came from squinting at distant horizons and carrying invisible burdens. "My baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's fine, beautiful little thing." He stepped no closer, keeping his distance as if understanding that she might flee at any moment. "I'm Jacob Winters. This is my home. She paused, realizing she'd never truly chosen her own name. "Evelyn, and this is Hope." The name surprised her as she spoke it. She'd never named her daughter aloud, had only whispered it in the dark hours of her imprisonment. But it felt right, here in this strange sanctuary, where Hope seemed to have found her at last. Jacob nodded slowly. "Well then, Evelyn and Hope, you're welcome to stay as long as you need, no questions asked." She waited for the conditions, the demands, the prices that always came with male kindness. But Jacob simply withdrew, leaving her to rest and heal in the soft morning light. Chapter 3, The Art of Forgetting. It was 3 days before Evelyn was strong enough to explore the cabin properly. And when she did, she discovered its strangest feature. There were no mirrors anywhere. Not in the bedroom where she'd been recovering. Not in the kitchen with its well-worn table and carefully organized shelves. Not even in the small washroom where Jacob had left her soap and clean towels. Everywhere a mirror should have been, there was empty space, or a landscape painting, or simply bare wall. "I noticed," she said to Jacob one morning, as they sat on the porch, watching Hope sleep in the wicker basket they'd lined with soft cotton. Jacob's hand stilled on the piece of wood he'd been whittling. "Mirrors are for people who want to see themselves clearly. I'm not one of those people." There was a story there, Evelyn knew, but she didn't press. She'd learned to recognize the weight of unspoken grief, the way it bent people's shoulders and made them choose careful words. Instead, she asked about the garden that surrounded the cabin like a living tapestry. "My wife planted it," Jacob said, his voice soft. "Mary. She said a home without growing things wasn't really a home at all. Past tense." Evelyn understood. "She had a gift," Jacob continued, gesturing toward the riot of color and green that somehow thrived in the harsh desert climate. "Could make anything grow, anywhere. said it was all about understanding what each plant needed, then giving it exactly that. What happened to her? Jacob's whittling knife paused against the wood. Fever took her. 2 winters ago. She's buried under the oak tree there, the big one with the swing. Evelyn looked where he pointed, and saw the rope swing hanging still in the windless air, its wooden seat worn smooth by countless hours of use. The tree it hung from was magnificent, its branches reaching toward the sky like arms raised in benediction. "I'm sorry," she said. "So am I." Jacob resumed his whittling, shaving away delicate curls of wood, every damned day. Chapter 4. The Language of Light. The days developed their own rhythm. Jacob would rise before dawn to tend his small herd of cattle, returning as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Evelyn would spend her mornings in the garden, learning to read the language of growing things while Hope dozed in her basket beneath the cottonwoods. In the afternoons, when the heat grew too fierce for outdoor work, Jacob taught her to make candles from the beeswax he collected from hives hidden in the hills. His hands were patient and sure as he showed her how to prepare the wicks, how to judge the temperature of the wax, how to create the steady, even flames that would burn clean and bright. "Light is hope," he said one afternoon as they worked side by side at the kitchen table, the air sweet with the scent of warm honey. "That's what Mary used to say. Darkness is just the absence of light, but light is something we make." Evelyn found herself drawn to the work, to the meditative process of creating something beautiful from simple materials. Her candles were clumsy at first, lopsided and quick to gutter, but Jacob never criticized or corrected. He simply showed her again, his voice patient and encouraging. "Everyone learns at their own pace," he said when she apologized for her 5th failed attempt. "The important thing is not to give up." In the evenings after Hope had been fed and settled for the night, they would sit on the porch and watch the stars emerge one by one. Jacob knew all their names, all their stories, and he shared them with her like gifts. Evelyn learned to identify the birds that visited the garden, the vermilion flycatcher with its bright red breast, the curve-billed thrasher with its liquid song, the roadrunner that would appear suddenly from behind the sagebrush like a feathered apparition. "Each one has its place," Jacob said one night as they watched a great horned owl hunt silently through the moonlight. "Its purpose. The desert might look empty to outsiders, but it's full of life if you know how to see it." Evelyn began to understand that he wasn't just talking about birds. Chapter 5. The Weight of Memory. As autumn deepened into winter, Evelyn's body healed and her strength returned. Hope grew from a tiny, fragile thing into a baby who smiled at the sound of her mother's voice and reached for the colored glass bottles that Jacob hung in the windows to catch the light. The birthmark on her temple had faded to a delicate silver, and her violet eyes held an unusual depth that made even the most practical visitors to the cabin stop and stare. "She's going to be special, that one," said Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman who ran the general store in the nearest town and who had become one of Evelyn's few friends. "Got the look of someone who sees things others miss." It was Mrs. Chen who brought the news that changed everything. "There's men been asking about you," she said quietly one December morning, her weathered hands gentle as she helped Evelyn sort through bolts of fabric. "Blackwood men. Offering money for information about a woman and baby matching your description." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "How much money?" "Enough to make people talk, eventually. You can't hide forever, child, not if they're determined to find you." That night, Evelyn sat on the porch despite the cold, watching the stars and trying to calm the panic that clawed at her chest. Jacob found her there, silent and shivering, and without a word went inside to fetch his heaviest coat. "Here," he said, draping it around her shoulders. The coat smelled like wood smoke and sage, like safety and home. "They're looking for me," she said simply. Jacob nodded, unsurprised. "Figured they would be, eventually. Rich men don't like it when their property goes missing." The casual way he said it, property, made Evelyn's stomach clench. That's what I was to them, what hope is, property to be controlled, shaped, used. "What are you going to do?" The question hung in the cold air between them like a challenge. Evelyn pulled Jacob's coat tighter around her shoulders and considered her options. She could run again, try to disappear into the vastness of the West with Hope. She could surrender, return to the Blackwood Ranch, and the locked room, and the endless prayers meant to cleanse her daughter of imaginary demons. Or she could fight, but with what weapons? She had no money, no connections, no power beyond her own stubborn will to protect her child. "I don't know," she admitted. "They have lawyers, influence, money. What do I have?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "You have truth," he said finally, "and you have people who care about you. That's more than you might think." Chapter 6. The Mirror's Edge. Christmas came quietly to the cabin, marked by a small pine tree that Jacob cut from the hills and decorated with Evelyn's candles and strings of dried berries. Hope, now 4 months old, was fascinated by the flickering lights, her violet eyes wide with wonder as she reached for the dancing flames. She's never seen Christmas before, Evelyn said, watching her daughter's face. They wouldn't let me. They said it was too dangerous, that she might bring bad luck to the celebration. Jacob's face darkened. What kind of people lock a mother and baby away during the holidays? The kind who believe love is something to be earned rather than given freely. It was on New Year's Eve that the confrontation finally came. Evelyn woke to the sound of horses approaching, their hoofbeats sharp against the frozen ground. Through the window she could see torches moving in the darkness, and her heart clenched with familiar terror. "Jacob," she whispered, shaking him awake. "They're here." He was alert instantly, his storm-gray eyes scanning the darkness. "Take Hope and go to the root cellar. There's a passage that leads to the old mine shaft. You can hide there until—" "No." Evelyn's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm done hiding. Evelyn, you don't understand. These men won't hesitate to hurt you, to take Hope. They have the law on their side." "Do they?" She lifted her chin, and Jacob saw something new in her eyes. Not fear, but a fierce determination that made her seem to glow in the candlelight. "I've been thinking about what you said, about truth being a weapon. What if the truth isn't what they've told everyone? What if there are other stories people haven't heard?" Before Jacob could respond, a harsh voice called out from the yard. "Evelyn Blackwood, we know you're in there. Come out peacefully and no one needs to get hurt." Evelyn walked to the window and looked out at the assembled men. Her brother-in-law Thomas, the family lawyer, and half a dozen ranch hands with rifles. They thought they were hunting a helpless woman and her cursed child, but they had no idea what they were really facing. "Light the candles," she said to Jacob. "All of them. Everyone we've made." "Evelyn, what are you? Trust me, please." Jacob hesitated only a moment before moving through the cabin, lighting candle after candle until the small house blazed with warm golden light. The glow spilled out through the windows and doorway, pushing back the darkness and making the men in the yard shift uncomfortably. Evelyn wrapped Hope in her warmest blanket and walked to the front door. When she opened it, she stood framed in the golden light like a figure from a painting, her dark hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes bright with purpose. "I'm here," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "What do you want?" Thomas Blackwood stepped forward, his face hard in the torchlight. "You know what we want. You're coming home. Both of you. This is my home," Evelyn said simply, "and Hope is my daughter. Not your family's property to be locked away and mistreated." "You're hysterical," the lawyer said dismissively. "Postpartum madness. Very common in women of your condition. The family is prepared to be merciful, to provide proper medical care." "I'm not hysterical," Evelyn interrupted. "I'm awake. For the first time in my life, I'm fully awake." She stepped out onto the porch, Jacob close behind her, and suddenly, the yard was filled with more than just the Blackwood men. Mrs. Chen emerged from behind the barn, carrying a lantern, and flanked by her 3 grown sons. Old Pete, the cattle rancher from the next valley over, appeared from the shadows with his foreman and 2 of his hands. Martha Sullivan, the school teacher from town, stepped into the circle of light with a notebook in her hands and a fierce expression on her face. "What's the meaning of this?" Thomas demanded, his confidence wavering. "Witnesses," Jacob said quietly. "People who've seen what kind of mother Evelyn is, what kind of man you are." Martha Sullivan opened her notebook and began to read in her clear teacher's voice. "On December 15th, I visited the Winters cabin and observed Mrs. Evelyn Blackwood caring for her infant daughter. The child appeared healthy, well-fed, and clearly beloved. Mrs. Blackwood showed no signs of mental instability or maternal incompetence. On the contrary, she demonstrated remarkable strength and wisdom in protecting her child from what she described as a hostile environment." "This is ridiculous," the lawyer sputtered. "You have no legal standing." "I do," Martha continued calmly. "As a mandated reporter and educator, I'm required by territorial law to document cases of child endangerment. Would you like to hear my observations about the conditions Mrs. Blackwood described at the Blackwood Ranch? The locked room, the restricted access to medical care, the repeated separation of mother and child." Thomas's face had gone pale. "You don't understand. The child is—" "There are signs." "Signs of what?" Evelyn asked, stepping closer. Hope stirred in her arms, her violet eyes opening to look directly at her uncle. "Signs that she's different, that she doesn't fit your narrow idea of what a child should be." She pulled back the blanket, revealing Hope's face in the candlelight. The baby's birthmark caught the golden glow, seeming to shimmer like starlight against her pale skin. Her unusual eyes were calm and alert, taking in the scene with an almost adult understanding. "Look at her," Evelyn said, her voice carrying across the silent yard. "Really look at her. What do you see?" The men stared, and gradually their expressions began to change. The ranch hands lowered their rifles. The lawyer closed his briefcase with a soft snap. Even Thomas seemed to shrink under the weight of his own prejudice. "I see a baby," Mrs. Chen said softly, "a beautiful innocent baby who deserves to be loved." "I see a miracle," added old Pete, "born to a woman brave enough to risk everything to protect her." One by one the witnesses spoke their truth into the desert night. They spoke of Evelyn's courage, of Hope's obvious health and happiness, of the way mother and child had bloomed in the sanctuary of Jacob's cabin. They spoke of love over fear, of acceptance over judgment, of the right of every human being to choose their own path. Chapter 7. The Light Within. When the last of the Blackwood men had ridden away, their torches disappearing into the darkness like dying stars, Evelyn found herself standing alone on the porch with Jacob. Hope had fallen asleep during the confrontation, her tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. "It's over," Jacob said, his voice full of wonder. "They won't be back." "No," Evelyn agreed. "They won't." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sky begin to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The candles still burned in the windows behind them, filling the air with the scent of beeswax and hope. "I need to tell you something," Jacob said suddenly, "about why there are no mirrors in the house." Evelyn waited, sensing the importance of this moment. "After Mary died, I couldn't bear to see myself, couldn't stand the reminder of what I'd lost, how I'd failed to protect her. I thought if I could just avoid looking at myself, I could avoid the pain." He turned to face her, his storm-gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "But watching you tonight, seeing how you faced your fears instead of hiding from them, I realized something. The person I was avoiding in the mirrors wasn't just a man in pain. He was also a man capable of love, of healing, of making a difference in the world." Evelyn felt her heart expand with a warmth that had nothing to do with the candles. "Jacob, I love you," he said simply. "I love you and Hope, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure you never have to face the darkness alone again." She looked at this man who had saved her life, who had taught her to make light from simple materials, who had shown her that love didn't have to be earned or deserved but could simply be given freely. Then she looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and saw the future stretching out before them like a golden road. "Yes," she whispered. Chapter 8. The House of Mirrors. 6 months later, on a warm summer morning, Evelyn stood in the bedroom she now shared with her husband, and watched him hang the first mirror in the house. It was a simple oval glass in a wooden frame, but it might as well have been made of starlight for the way it transformed the space. Jacob caught her reflection in the mirror, and smiled. "What do you see?" Evelyn studied her image, the woman with loose dark hair and eyes bright with contentment, holding a baby who gurgled with delight at her own reflection. Behind them, the room glowed with morning light, and the promise of countless tomorrows. "I see us," she said. "I see home." They had been married in spring, in a ceremony held in the garden under the oak tree where Mary rested. The whole community had come. Mrs. Chen, with her family, old Pete and his hands, Martha Sullivan with her careful documentation of a love story that had triumphed over fear. Hope had worn a dress of white cotton with tiny pearl buttons, her birthmark visible and unmarked by shame. Now, as summer painted the desert in shades of gold and green, their small family had found its rhythm. Jacob still tended his cattle and kept his bees, but now he came home to the sound of laughter and the sight of Hope crawling determinedly across the kitchen floor. Evelyn had opened a small business making candles, her reputation spreading throughout the territory for flames that burned clean and true. "I've been thinking," Jacob said, adjusting the mirror until it caught the light perfectly, "about what Mary used to say, about understanding what each thing needs, and giving it exactly that. And I think what you needed was someone who would love you without conditions, without trying to change you or control you. Someone who would see you clearly and choose you anyway." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "And what did you need?" Jacob met her eyes in the mirror. "Someone who would show me that the past doesn't have to define the future, that love doesn't end when people die. It just transforms into something else, something that can light up the darkest places." Hope babbled happily from her basket, reaching toward the mirror with chubby hands. In the reflected light, her birthmark looked like exactly what it was, a natural mark of beauty, as individual and precious as her mother's courage or her father's gentle strength. "She's going to ask questions someday," Evelyn said, "about where she came from, why we left, what happened to her birth father's family. And we'll tell her the truth," Jacob replied, "that love is stronger than fear, that sometimes the greatest courage is in choosing to build something new, rather than accepting something broken, that she was born from love, and raised in love, and that makes her exactly who she's supposed to be." Epilogue. The Light Eternal. 20 years later, Hope Winters stood in her childhood bedroom, now preparing for her own wedding. The mirror that had marked her parents' triumph still hung on the wall, reflecting a young woman with violet eyes and a crescent birthmark that she wore like a badge of honor. "You're sure about this?" Evelyn asked, adjusting her daughter's veil. At 43, she had aged gracefully, her face lined with laughter and her hair silver-streaked with wisdom. "I'm sure," Hope said, smiling at her reflection. "Daniel loves me exactly as I am. Birthmark, strange eyes, and all, just like Papa loved you." In the mirror, Evelyn could see Jacob waiting in the garden, his hair now completely silver but his eyes still bright with love. Around him, the community they had built over 2 decades mingled and laughed, celebrating another victory of love over fear. "Your grandmother Mary would have loved this," Evelyn said softly. "She does love it." Hope replied with the quiet certainty of someone who had grown up surrounded by the truth. Love doesn't end, it just changes form. They walked together toward the garden, toward the future, toward the endless possibility of love multiplied and shared. Behind them, the house blazed with light, not just from the candles in every window, but from the love that had transformed four walls into a sanctuary, a broken woman into a warrior, a fearful man into a beacon of hope. The desert wind carried their laughter across the hills, where it mixed with the song of birds and the whisper of growing things. In the distance, storm clouds gathered, but here in this place where love had conquered fear, where light had defeated darkness, where courage had triumphed over cruelty, the sun shone bright and eternal. Love, after all, transcends every boundary, even the one between yesterday and tomorrow, between who we were and who we choose to become.